Hello and welcome to the Sunday Guardian show by Joyeeta Basu. Viewers, today I'm going to discuss who else but President Trump, who is creating so much news, not just in the world, in India particularly, ever since he has called us a dead economy, ever since he has threatened us with 25% sanctions plus substantially more as a penalty for buying Russian oil. It's a different matter that the US itself is buying, I think, uranium, enriched uranium. 27% of US's supply of enriched uranium comes from Russia. And it's a different matter that China buys more oil than we do. It's a different matter. The 37% of gas that comes to EU comes from Russia. None of these things matter. What matters is that India has been buying oil, if you ask me, legally. But anyway, right now, as you know, the mood in India is very bad when it comes to Mr. Trump. So, what exactly is going on with him? To explain this to us, I've got a very special guest. You have met her before. She is, in fact, a personal friend of mine, Cleo Paskal, who is a geopolitical analyst, non resident senior fellow at FDD in Washington, D.C. And she's a columnist with the Sunday Guardian, and she is also a very close watcher of the MAGA movement, which is Make America Great Again. That is Mr. Trump's support base. She has been a very close observer of that movement. She knows a lot of people. She knows what exactly is going on in the US, and she has been, observing them for quite some time now. So, welcome, Cleo, to the show.
Thank you. Very, very good to be on.
Yes. So, Cleo,
Good.
what is going on with the MAGA in particular? How are they reacting? What is Mr. What do they have to say about what Mr. Trump is doing? Are they very happy that they are going around? He's going around tariffing everybody, and even though none of us can make head or tail of what he is doing, what is the mood like?
So there's a different, a very different view of it within, I'd say. So MAGA is a mansion with many houses in it. There are a lot of different kinds of MAGA. By and large, most of them are fine with tariffs. That's not an issue. The this sting that India felt over that dead economy tweet was, I think, a sting that many in the movement felt over the tweets around Epstein, where Mr. President Trump sort of talked about, why do you think this is important, and go back, it's that sort of thing. So that
I
was
don't need your support, he said.
yeah, and that was very unusual, and inexplicable. And there was a very good analysis done at one point early on by, I think, Rush Limbaugh, who said there's, nobody can nobody can drive a wedge between MAGA and President Trump, except President Trump. There's that was a moment that was, I think, surprising for many. And it's not about really them voting for the Democrats. It's not a normal political situation. There's a certain percentage that can just decide to stay home. And these are people who might have voted for President Obama in other elections and then voted for Trump. These are the Obama-Trump voters, or may not have voted in many different election cycles, who came out to support President Trump. In many cases, they also are not fans of the war in Ukraine, and especially about the U.S. getting involved in war in Ukraine, or about getting involved in the Middle East either. So they're they're more. It's different in about how to look at the Indo-Pacific. So if you take a look, for example, at Steve Bannon, not a fan of of more engagement in Ukraine, not a fan of engagement in in Israel, but huge backer of Taiwan and of the Philippines and the whole Central Pacific area. So it's not an isolationist, but it's a focus on U.S. strategic, what they consider U.S. strategic priorities, and that includes first island chain, second island chain, third island chain, Central Pacific. And many of those would be happy for India to be taking a larger role in security in the Indian Ocean, for example, and taking some of that weight off of the US. This is how it's perceived. And so the continued engagement in Ukraine, in even there's some of it, we're talking about maybe 10% of MAGA, but it's enough. And this is again, Steve Bannon has gone on the record saying, you know, 10% and you lose the House in the midterms, and you could possibly lose the Senate. It's very tight now. So they don't care about tariffs. Tariffs isn't is fine with them, but they care about these other things, and these other things are what's being watched very closely.
You see, when you go to social media in particular,
Hmm.
there are, I would say, senior politicians, Republican politicians who are close to Trump. And of course, there are White House staffers and all. You see them, I mean, basically saying a lot of stuff about India that's frankly offensive. So there is a belief that is growing in India that they are taking their cue from the president. I mean, when it comes to and there is a lot of anger and hostility towards India that we see from, I would say, certain MAGA handles. You can make out from that. I mean, to talk like one of the biggest push they have is that you have to scrap the H-1B visa. And
Hmm.
then they are talking about, how they are taking away our jobs, they are taking away our businesses, they are kind of, I mean, although if it comes in terms of numbers, it may not be the truth, but I don't think so. What exactly the general, I mean, if at all they are talking about India, what do they think about it? Are Indians actually seen as cheaters? As someone called Stephen Miller talked
Hmm.
about, how India cheats when it comes to immigration. So basically, he was accusing the Indian government of sending people in illegally. I mean, what exactly is going on with these people?
So again, there are different factions, but there are also the Indian individuals, the Indian state, Indo-Americans. Those are uh, all different buckets, so to speak. Now, sometimes they are getting lumped together, and it is extremely ugly. But some the on the H-1B visa thing, the narrative is that there are graduates from U.S. universities that aren't getting jobs because the large corporations have a pipeline to India of workers who will undercut them, and because they're there on that sort of a visa, they can't stand up for their own rights, and they're sort of hostages to the company that hires them. Whereas if they hired Americans, the workers would have more leverage and they would be more costly. That's the narrative. And the what again? I'm referring to Bannon now, but he's not the only one I watch. But one of the things that Bannon said early on in this H-1B visa thing was, show me one person who's come in on an H-1B visa who's doing a job that an American can't do. And that's kind of the mantra that, and if an American can do it and wants that job, they should get the job before somebody who comes in from somewhere else. But he's also been a big supporter of India as a country. He was involved in setting up the Howdy Modi event in Texas and things like that, and very cognizant of the importance of the Indo-American community and the strategic importance of India. But they also are kind of signing on to the BRICS thing, to the anti-BRICS thing, is and how it would affect the U.S. dollar without openly differentiating between the role India is playing in the BRICS, which is functionally slowing down a BRICS currency, as opposed to China, who's pushing for a BRICS currency. So these are all complexities that are some have more nuance on and some don't. But in the debate that goes on in the U.S., and you saw it, I think personally when you came to the U.S., India just has a really small role. And if you feel like if you want to tell people who are watching a little bit about how you experience that, because we had that event at FDD where you
FDD.
came to speak, and I mean, and FDD is a pretty serious think tank. It doesn't take any foreign money. It doesn't take any defense sector money. We put out a invitation across the town to let them know you were there. And how did you find that interaction?
You are asking me now. Okay, fine. The thing, I thought the interaction was absolutely great, but also at the same time, as the Indian in FDD, that Indian guy Pavak, uh,
Yeah.
told me that I hope I'm allowed to say this, because FDD people will be watching it. I mean, in Washington, no one knows anything about India. So when I had that, and I was very surprised that that particular that address I gave at FDD. I mean, so many people. It was a Friday morning, if I think remember correctly, Cleo. Yeah,
Mhm.
Friday morning, and so many people turned up, and they were so clueless about India. They knew nothing about India. And I had gone there after the Pahalgaon terror attack. I think this was happening about 8 or 10 days after the Pahalgaon terror attack. They knew nothing about it. I mean, that is something really surprised me. I mean, people, the kind of ignorance that is there in DC when it comes to India. And one particular person you and I met, that person told us, I don't want to name that person, of course, here. That person told us that this town, there's no Indian money in this town, there is only Qatar money in this town you know so I think that is a problem. And I did meet embassy people, and there was like, when I told them this, they were like, yeah, but our economic heft is what is going to carry us through. But sorry, that is not working right now, it seems, sitting in Delhi right now, and what I heard in DC at that point of time, just 3 months ago. So the thing is, well, Operation Sindoor had not taken place when I was there. In fact, it took place the night I was coming back. But the thing is, you see, so yes, I think you keep telling me about, the problem is the outreach that in fact, I've been talking to others also. When it comes to foreign policy, I mean, basically, players in DC, Indians are not reaching out to enough people.
Yeah, and what I found interesting about who came was you had people from other think tanks who are interested in
Yes.
Japan or Taiwan, and
Yes,
they
other things.
understand.
Important big think tank scheme. Hmm.
Yeah, and they understood the importance of India because they look at the Indo-Pacific as a whole, but they don't really know much about India. And I mean, I don't actually think Indian any experts from DC think tanks who look at India came, right?
No,
I don't
no
think
one, no one.
there wasn't a single one.
Someone who is a Japan observer, he came.
Yeah, yeah, and Taiwan and
Taiwan
Taiwan
and
came.
Japan.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
someone is a Burma, she observes, I think, Myanmar.
yeah.
Because one question came to me about India and Myanmar, I remember.
That's
So
right.
no one who observes India came.
So there are two issues there. One is there aren't that many people who observe India, and the other is the ones who do observe India maybe are sort of in just a very narrow path, right? So they're not really opening up or engaging. I mean, I don't know. There's some good ones, but the community is really small. You'll find many, many more times people looking at a Taiwan or looking at a Japan, and from all different points of view. And at the same time, you've got a ton of Chinese and Pakistani money, sometimes turbocharged by that Qatari money, placing people in think tanks, in the media, supporting a countervailing narrative, so that when you get there, and I think we saw that in that room, you spend a lot of time unlearning people, just starting off with, no, what you're saying is wrong about India. Now, like, we need to kind of deprogram you. I mean, just on factual stuff, so that you can then build up the fact. It's not about an influence operation. It's about that information is wrong. The information you have about India is not accurate. So it and what's happening there is reflective, I think, of what's happening in the universities. The same groups. I know you've been looking at anti-Semitism issues. The same groups that are pushing anti-Israel narratives. It's not a far jump to get to anti-India narratives, right? Because they have a lot of the same financial backers and a lot of the same goals. And one of the big goals is to drive a wedge between India and the US. So this is why it's incredibly frustrating when you see some of that messaging reflected by people who are very influential. But it's not. It, it's not. You can't, when you're in India and you see how India is pulsing and growing and expanding, and you see what happened to the G20 that was hosted in India, and you can't imagine that people just don't really know about India, and there's just no very little visibility for India and DC because it's so evident to you how big and important and part of the global future India is and is going to be. But uh, it's just not visible like that in DC and in the media. I mean, look at, when was the last time you saw proper reporting in the New York Times or the Washington Post or or Foreign Affairs about India?
I don't remember. I mean, the thing is, no, no. I mean, I'll tell you the kind. That is why I think one of the reasons why the reporters who are here, they're the correspondents, they're foreign correspondents who pass themselves off as, experts on India. But many of them are kind of, I would say, ideologically motivated, and many of them are come from a particular kind of a chattering elite class, which is not really conveying the right kind of reporting, doing the right kind of reporting when it comes. I mean, not just, I would say, the US, overall the West, they don't get to hear about the actual things that are happening in India. That is why I find this kind of conversation very weird when they are talking about, H1B visa, you stop, and India's, economy will be finished. I mean,
Yeah.
you understand how outrageously nonsense that is. So this, if this is the kind of understanding they have of India, oh, we want to punish India, we will stop them from buying Russian oil. This Lindsey Graham gentleman, he's coming at India by, we are going to finish their economy by what, 500% tariff or something like that. But the thing is that I think they don't even understand, and perhaps that is also the reason. If I'm going to ask you the next question, I think Mr. Trump also lacks an understanding of India. There is no serious idea about what India is. So that is why, if he wants to punish India for whatever be the reasons, okay, we have not yet been able to figure out the reasons. But the thing is that, so perhaps he is also, I would say, overplaying his hand. What could have, I would say, let's put it this way: is this born out of ignorance, or is Mr. Trump doing it to all his allies, and suddenly he is only very pro China and pro Pakistan, and all his allies he have driven out?
So I don't know, because there's I mean, there he does have the Ukraine issues. Again, it's probably not about India as India. And
And
I know it's hard to get around. Yeah. And
but he has said it's about India. You
yeah,
see,
but so the context was, especially the debt economy thing, was um, he's given this August 8th deadline to Russia, and he came in with a bunch of campaign promises, many of which he's actually accomplished, but not Ukraine. And that's a real problem for him politically, but also I actually think personally. I think the when he was coming in, he was talking about 5,000 people dying a week, and and I think that he's frustrated with Putin, and he's lashing out, and and all of the things that MEA has said and that you said about everybody else is also completely valid, obviously, and the Chinese buying more and things. And but I think that it just got lumped in together, and it's not it 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 doesn't make sense from a domestic political perspective, which is one of his priorities, because the Indo-American community obviously won't like it either. And there's been this shift from among Indo-American voters from the Democrat Party sort of easing into MAGA a little bit. Not necessarily the Republican Party, but easing into President Trump, because as 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 you know personally, there was a lot of hope that President Trump would have a very different relationship. Yeah. The this this doesn't fit with one of his. It feels more like that Epstein tweet, right? Where it's going to potentially affect the base voters, but he's kind of got a different set of priorities, and that isn't being taken into consideration. So I don't get it. I'm looking for one of the people that I watch for to understand MAGA and to understand polling is a pollster called Richard Barris, Baris. Yeah, and he has a show on Rumble called The People's Pundit, and he's very accurate. Polling has been highly politicized the in the U.S. There are only maybe three or four major pollsters that are actually trying to understand where things are going, as opposed to try to influence the media cycle. And Barris is one of them. He has a kind of forceful personality. He's a former he was formerly in the U.S. military, but he's been tracking these voters very carefully. And like Bannon, he's saying that there are they were Trump or bust voters. They just came out for President Trump. And in fact, some of them didn't vote down ticket, or some of them voted for Democrats down ticket. And these sort of tweets, like the bombing of Iran was very damaging, the Epstein tweet was very damaging, and I think a subset of all of that will be these tweets about India for some of those new Indo-American voters who were trying out Trump. So it in terms of in one of the highest priorities for President Trump, which is political support, this doesn't it doesn't really make sense. So India is kind of looking at it from a geopolitical perspective, and but President Trump's priorities are very much domestic political calculus, and these things are out of context. And one of the things that keeps getting brought up is that when you get into the White House, you become in a bubble, and you're very influenced. The information that reaches you has a lot of gatekeepers, and it's unclear if how things are being reported. Now, he's the president. The buck stops with him, so to speak. Take responsibilities for his own actions, but obviously, there's been a questioning within those sorts of analysts about what sort of information is actually getting to him, because it is diverging from some key elements of what the base was expecting him to do. The and just to get back to kind of the story of India, because when the H-1B visa thing came out, we saw a lot of very, very ugly tweets that were reminiscent of the of kind of narratives of like beggars and snake charmers India. Like it was really people who they just didn't had no idea what. And the Indian story, it, as a human story, isn't being conveyed. It's not. It's just not being heard. And yes, MEA has a role, but Indian media also has a role. I had a very long flight, and on just recently, I just came back from Saipan, 14-hour flight from Tokyo, and I watched movies a friend recommended.
I had recommended one to you. Did you watch that?
I did. So 12 fail, right?
First fail. How did
Yeah.
you like it?
So so I have to admit that I almost stopped watching after the first like 20 minutes because it was just so heartbreaking. All of these horrible things happened to this, you know, boy who just wanted to contribute to his country, to better himself and to contribute to his country. And it was just heartbreaking and to but restart, right. You have to restart. So I kept watching, but it reminded me a lot of there were a lot of movies like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington that were similar kind of stories from the 1950s and 60s from the US of just hope and honesty and belief in nation and striving to improve yourself. So that part of the Indian story isn't getting seen here. And it really does it does resonate. I mean, I hadn't heard of that movie. I'm sure it was a huge movie there, but it wasn't. I don't know if it's on Netflix, but it wasn't translated. So it, it it's not a small thing. India's soft power story. Uh, People it, around the world know it through Bollywood and stuff like that. But that kind of a story is a story that anybody living in rural America or Africa or many, it's just a human story. So it's frustrating to me that you come into DC and they look at you and they go, well, what about the S-400 or what about
Which
killing yeah
company is that
yeah
to? Okay.
yeah yeah or why are you killings or targeting Indian terrorists on U.S. soil or like it's just it without having this larger context of what India is and striving to become and can be not just for itself but for many many people around the world. And so you get all of that, and so you get a tweet like that out of President Trump, and it hurts. um and it drives a wedge between you and the US, and luckily, in your case you've been to the US, so you know that there are a lot of different kinds of Americans, and you have a broader view of how people reacted to you and other sorts of interactions you had. And so you can ride out the relationship with the US and say, okay, well that might be just this administration, but once we go through, we can work together in the future. But many people haven't been to the US. And who benefits from this? Obviously, China, Pakistan, anybody trying to drive a wedge between not India and the US, but Indians and Americans. So, yeah,
Here, I just want to mention, Cleo, if you remember, you asked me what did I like best about the US, when I
mhm,
was almost through with my trip. And if you remember my answer was people.
yeah,
Because that is something I really felt. I had gone there with a completely different view. And I mean, I had heard so much about racism, and that is why it also surprises me the kind of stuff I see online. I did not see even 0.001% of that. I mean, people were so welcoming, people were so, I mean, helpful. All right, so from where, I mean, so, and when I go to X in particular, and I kind of tirade I see there. Maybe I was visiting a particular part of the US where they're very welcoming of, brown skinned people or not. But it was a completely different experience. And that is why it really saddens me, as you are talking about, that Indian story is not being told. And Mr. Trump, it seems, is falling victim to that. I mean, otherwise, why would a US president? I mean, this is sheer ignorance. Why is he hyphenating India and Pakistan? On what parameters? But
Yeah.
yeah, but you know something? Even though India had problems with the Biden administration, it seems the Biden administration was better at understanding India. Do you agree with that?
I don't. So the thing that I don't know is I don't know what's happening that we're not seeing because you keep hearing that, or I keep hearing that the defense ties are very strong and 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 increasingly strong, and especially around things like tech cooperation and AI and things like that. And people in Department of Defense truly understand how important India is, not just as a proxy to use against China. I mean, not that, but the way that India is innovating on things like political warfare are things that the U.S. is learning or can learn from, and they do within DoD. Of course, everybody always says India is difficult to deal with, but you don't need to tell an Indian that India is difficult to deal with. I mean, it's either, and
Especially
that's
our bureaucracy.
well, that's it, and MEA is too small, for what India can be and pathway. So I don't know that you're not getting the sort of stuff you got under Biden, like diplomats going to Kashmir or going to, through Pakistan. You're not getting that kind of, I mean, in a negative way, that sort of real erosion of, or what happened in Bangladesh. I'm not sure that would have happened under a Trump administration. The way that State Department behaved during the Bangladesh thing, I don't, that kind of active role that seemed to have been playing, the State Department seemed to be playing I don't see that now. And that's again, that was very corrosive, socially destructive, breaking things apart at a ground level. So we're seeing the very visible, the tip, or I'm seeing just the tip of the iceberg in terms of that U.S. India relationship. I don't know what's going on underneath. What we saw going on underneath under President Biden really wasn't good. And now that and USAID has now been dismantled, reincorporated into State Department, a lot of that, the monies that were being used for some of those programs is gone or reallocated, and that's a big deal. I mean, even things like Voice of America or Radio Free Asia. I work mostly in the Pacific, and I mean, it was known to have been penetrated by hostile forces, by people who came out of Chinese media and then they get hired into Voice of America to do that. So that's sort of starting to be dealt with. And remember, we're only 6 months into the Trump administration, but those are very big deals. Those are so and that was being deployed in a completely different way under the Biden administration, and in some cases, really kind of dangerous and not helpful way. So I don't know what else is going on. I can tell you what the visible stuff is. Obviously, now it's very visible and it's not ideal. But all of this other stuff, which had been a problem under Biden, from what I can tell, is much less of a problem now. you
No,
don't,
but
yeah, go ahead.
no, it's but the problem is, you see, it's going to be a real problem if he starts giving us sanctions and all. That becomes a real problem. And I mean, the talk right now in India, at least, is that that this is reminding the way Mr. Trump is going, and President Trump is going about everything. It is reminding us of the big, I mean, bad days of, say, for example, 1971. Okay,
Yeah.
when the US sent the Seventh Fleet into the Bay of Bengal. And then it is reminding us of when Clinton sanctioned us. So you see, was there really any need for this? You see, and you say the defense ties are good. Even I know that, that the space thing that was launched between ISRO and NASA and all. But is it going to be possible to sustain this relationship if they actually take certain serious actions against India? Because then it starts hurting us economically, and that is not ideal. So is it possible to sustain this relationship, or do we have to suffer, I mean, basically for the next 3.5 years that he is in power?
I don't know. I couldn't have anticipated a tweet like that a month
Several
ago.
tweets like that,
Yeah,
by the
yeah,
way, have
yeah,
come.
yeah, yeah. But so I don't know. And uh, again, I really, I know it sounds crazy, but I just really, I don't think that India is being thought of very much. So this is a byproduct, this in part of the situation with Russia and Ukraine. If the situation with Russia and Ukraine is resolved, then I don't expect the same sort of stuff to continue. Uh, it, personally, I would like to see it much more just looking at India as India and all of the whole package and how that fits into a free and open Indo-Pacific, especially in the context of what's going on in with Chinese aggression, illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive activities, as the Filipinos put it, across the region, and not as a byproduct of Russia, Ukraine. I mean, it's gone back. You're funny. You talk about 71. The concern was always that India would be rehyphenated with Pakistan, but now it's like being rehyphenated with Russia. I mean, it's like it's gone back to kind of the kind of a Soviet India view of things. But I don't know. I don't know how deep that is. I don't know whether that's kind of a passing. I just don't know. But again, there's India and the US, and then there's Indians and Americans, and they're two different things. And I think that it would be helpful for any incoming, whatever happens politically in the US, for there to be more understanding of what India is, and the way what its possibilities are. I mean, India's geography has has put it in a very difficult position, and there are certain realities that it has to balance that the U.S. with Mexico on one side and Canada on the other doesn't have to deal with those complexities. And this goes back to George Washington. Part of what he talked about when the country was founded was the U.S. being a detached and distant land that didn't have all of these border complexities, and it gave it much more freedom within its foreign policy. Uh, India is not detached from all of these complexities, and it takes a while to understand it for anybody. And that process, it would be helpful for it to start at the university levels. And again, there's a ton of money that's going into the universities to push specific narratives, and they're not India friendly. And then that feeds into the hiring into State Department or NSC or all that sort of stuff. So there's a long term effort that has to be made, including getting better coverage, more journalists, just to and not the advantage India has is that unlike China, you're true story is enough. You don't have to create a narrative or lie or cover things over. You just have to help people understand what India is and all of its complexities. And that transparency will be makes it easier. You're not telling a lie. You just have to get more people to understand the truth. That like 12th failed. It shows how India is definitely not perfect, and Indians aren't perfect, and just like all humans, right? But they're
And
but it
we are not afraid of that truth. We don't
that's
hide
right.
the truth.
That's right. And so that's all you have to do is get more people to hear that truth. And and I'm glad that you saw just people just don't know. And you're kind of like, how can you not know? We're over a billion people. We're growing at whatever percent a year. We're taking on the Chinese. We're growing. Like, how do you not know? Well, they just don't know.
Yeah, it's a fact. Someone told me this was in New York, and the thing is that when I was discussing this whole Israel problem, Israel Jewish anti-Semitism and all, I mean, I said yes, India also has a civilization. He was like, India has a civilization that goes back. I said, yeah, it does, and I was like, okay, that is the level of ignorance. I think we know more about American history than any American will ever know about what India is. And I think this is the problem that is with Donald Trump as well. And there's a belief that is growing here. I would say that he's bringing his personality to foreign policy as a result of which, I mean, he's unhappy with us maybe because we did not give him credit for that stopping that war between India and Pakistan. Well, our government is saying, sorry, you did not do it, we did it, or they approached us. I think from that the ego part has come in, and then he wants to be transactional. He wants to break from what I've told you also, that he wants our access to our agricultural market. He wants access in our dairy market, but there are certain areas that we are not going to allow the US to dump. And I think he's bringing his personality to it, and the whole thing is falling apart. This refusal, I would say, to engage, I would say, to understand India, I think that's a personality problem. Would you
Right.
agree? I mean, I know
So
it's kind of going into a. Tell
yeah,
me.
I mean, well, but so I'm Canadian, right?
Yes, yes, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. The
yeah,
viewers need
okay,
to know that. Let's not forget that.
yeah. But so what has he been saying about Canada? I mean, do you remember what he was
Oh my
saying
God.
about? Yeah, so in, in I mean, and it's kind of a funny position to be in, where normally I come on an Indian show and I'm like apologizing for Canada. Now I've got to sort of, but if you remember, I mean, I mean, most Indians didn't disagree with what he was tweeting about Prime Minister Trudeau, but I mean, that that was a whole different level than what he's tweeting about India, and we're neighbors. So he can be pretty forceful. And what he's tweeting about Brazil, and it's not, the point is, it's not unusual. And in fact, I don't think there haven't been any personal attacks on Prime Minister Modi. There've been, but he has personally attacked many leaders of foreign countries.
The
In
latest is the Switzerland leader, prime minister or president.
Yeah. Yeah. So in again, it's understandable that Indians will focus on what he says about India, but if you compare it to the whole orchestra, like you're listening to one instrument in the orchestra, but if you look at all of the instruments that he's playing, this is like a piccolo compared to a bass drum, in terms of what he's saying about, other countries. So what?
Which brings us to the last topic of that. I think we have
Yeah.
gone on. This is what happens when you start chatting. You keep on, I mean, both of us keep
Yeah.
going. So
Yeah.
the thing is that the last topic, the US and China, Mr. Trump and China. what exactly is he doing? And you have just come back from Saipan, and if you can tell our viewers what exactly happened there, and what is the US and what China, why Saipan, that area, that Pacific area is so important for the world, not just for the free world, and what China is doing, and what is Mr. Trump doing about the whole thing?
Yeah, so this is Saipan is the main island in a string of islands that are a U.S. territory called the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands. So the acronym is
The
CNMI.
Pacific.
Yeah, it's in, so this is just north of Guam. So the waters of Guam touch the waters of CNMI.
Near Taiwan.
Yeah, so this is U.S. territory.
Right.
It's a 4 hour flight, uh, kind of south of Japan, south of Tokyo. About 4 hours away from South Korea, 4 hours away from Taiwan, but it's America. It's U.S. soil, American citizens. This area was held by Japan from 1914 until 1944, until the Marines and other American military came through and fought. The Battle of Saipan was just, all battles are horrific, but this was particularly brutal because Japan knew that if the U.S. took Saipan, then they could hit mainland Japan with the B-29 bombers, which is exactly what happened. The U.S. won the Battle of Saipan, and on the neighboring island of Tinian, which is also now part of the U.S., that they that airport there became the busiest airport in the world at the end of 1944 and into 1945 as the waves of B-29 bombers took off to hit Japan. And I don't know when this is going to air, but on August 6th, it's the 80th anniversary of the Enola Gay taking off from Tinian on its way to Hiroshima to drop the first atomic bomb. So this is that's how close this is to Asia. And after the war, it's a little long story, but eventually in the 1970s, this area became part of the United States, and they voted to become part of the United States. So Guam, this whole row of CNMI and Guam is American territory, and it's the Asian border of the U.S. People think the U.S. stops at Hawaii. It's an 8 hour flight west from Hawaii to Guam, and and then you get there, and that's the U.S. It's still the U.S. That's a problem for China. For
Yeah, which
China
is
to
right
have
next door.
Yeah. So if China wants to take Taiwan, which it does, it has this American territory right there. Mostly we talk about Guam. The focus is mostly on Guam, but CNMI is right next door, and those airfields where the B-29s took off from. Currently, there's hundreds of millions of dollars going in from the U.S. military to resurrect them, to use them as a divert airfield. So the U.S. Department of Defense has realized how strategically important those islands are. The problem is, as India knows very well, China isn't focused just on kinetic warfare, putting in bombers and things like that. They try to achieve war aims through political warfare as well. And there's been a lot of Chinese effort to create an environment within the Commonwealth and Northern Mariana Islands that is sympathetic to welcoming Chinese. And as a result, it's the only place in the US where Chinese can arrive without a visa. They can Chinese can land in CNMI without a visa. They're not supposed to leave CNMI. They're not supposed to go to Guam. They're supposed to stay there, but in the hundreds, but undoubtedly more, they're illegally taking the 60-mile boat trip to get to Guam. And then they're being found in Guam wandering around U.S. military bases. These are all cases that have been proven in court. The woman that ran the Bureau of Motor Vehicles Department in Saipan was convicted, along with a Chinese co-conspirator, of selling U.S. driver's licenses to Chinese who are there unlawfully. And once you have U.S. ID, you can start the process of sort of integrating yourself. There's been an issue with birth tourism. Chinese come and have a baby, and then they've had their baby in the US, so then they can use that to claim US citizenship later on. Their their murders associated with the drug dealing, and the big thing was there was a Chinese-owned casino running in Saipan that, and when it's opened in like 2014, 2015, at the beginning, in the first 3 months of operation, they had less than 20 tables, and they were running $5.3 billion through that casino. And they were averaging at times $2 billion a month. So that's more than the casinos, like, proportionally the casinos in Macau. And that's money coming straight into the US system. So they'll say the people don't leave, but once you're there, you're in the US financial system. And there was a governor, the governor of CNMI, Arnold Palacios, who was trying to diversify. He met with the Taiwanese, he was working with the Japanese, and he was trying to pull away from all of this Chinese influence in CNMI. And on July 23rd, he unexpectedly died. And so,
Mysteriously, also, perhaps.
yeah, I mean, I don't, out of respect for the family, I don't want to speculate. There hasn't been an autopsy, but what you can see is how quickly things have started to change. So they announced uh, just yesterday that direct flights from Hong Kong have started up again, or they're going to start up soon. The woman who represents CNMI has a congressional delegate, like a member of Congress, and she's very actively pushing for continuing Chinese arriving without a visa, and she also wants a lifting of the caps on direct flights from mainland China.
So, how long will Saipan stay inside with the US? How long is it before the Chinese take it over? And what is Mr. Donald Trump doing about China, except for what it seems kowtowing to them? The last
Yeah,
question.
yeah. So I don't know. I went to the funeral. I have a huge amount of respect for Governor Palacios. Uh, and the delegation, U.S. government delegation, was very low level. There was a deputy assistant secretary for insular affairs from the Department of Interior, and he was originally from that place. And when he worked in the legislature there, he helped write the legislation that allowed in the Chinese casino. And that's so, and this was something that, and this is where we get to what we were talking about before, about the base, which is that Steve
The
Bannon
MAGA
has,
we were talking
yeah,
about.
yeah. So Steve Bannon took this on as a topic.
Yes,
He
I saw that.
live stream, yeah, he live streamed the funeral, he live streamed the mass, he had reporting happening from it. They don't like it, but the administration hasn't, it doesn't seem to have penetrated the administration. It could be lack of interest, it could be lobbying. I don't know. So this is what we're trying to, things are evolving, and I think a lot of people are looking the NVIDIA chip thing is another thing that people are kind of confused about. So this is a developing story. I don't feel confident enough now to say I know what's going on, but it's certainly not going on in a direction that currently is representative of what I think the threat is coming from China, and what I think the benefit is from working with other friends and allies more closely.
Absolutely. So that is something that we have to watch out, viewer, what Mr. Trump is doing with China. Perhaps we will get to understand after some time what exactly is going on in the White House in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Cleo, so much for coming for this show. I really enjoyed speaking to you. It's always such fun. It's so much fun, always, actually. And thank you, viewers, for watching.